All right, welcome back, guys, to Lifecrafting with Alena. If you are checking us out on our new YouTube page, or if you're tuning in to the Reminder Remedy podcast, welcome to season 4. I am super stoked because we are joined today by my girl, Mary Kate Schutt. Hey, girl, how are you?
Hi, Alena. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. And so it's interesting because I feel like anytime people are interviewing, they have like these long bios, which is cool. Like I think that it's fun to like hear yourself kind of like portrayed in your bio. But I like to talk about how I meet my guests or kind of how I come about them, unless they're like strangers, then I'll do the other way. But anyway, so guys, so y'all know that I did the positive psychology certification program at the Flourishing Center out of New York last year, which if you listen to the podcast, you know was just like the best thing ever. Not only because I was able to take my knowledge and research and understanding of the field of positive psychology to the next level, but I also talked about how the format or the structure of the program was just exactly what I needed during the pandemic, because it was like this hybrid model, and there was just like this deep connection amongst my peers and my colleagues, which now has really made me think about how I bring offerings to the world, because I think that, just studying material is great, but then being able to have a space where you can discuss it, it was just something about that I think just created this bond. So anyways, Mary Kate was in my class. She was basically the star pupil. Let's just put that out there. I'm calling you out here, but you know how there's like always a somebody in the classroom that is just so thought provoking. Their energy is just right. They contribute to every conversation. This is my interpretation of like you. When I think about it, it was like you were like the one that I felt like everybody felt very comfortable with, everyone supported, things that you had going on in your personal life. We watched you get married. And then I just remember one day, like thinking, oh, this girl is just so sweet. She's so smart. She's like all into academia, and like her family loves positive psychology. Then she comes on the screen with this sleeve ass tattoo. And I was like, what? You better get it, Mary Kate. Like I did not see that coming.
So good.
So that is my quick introduction to like my first impression of you. So welcome to the show.
Oh my God, thank you. I appreciate your kind words, and your portrayal of me during CAP is so interesting. I feel like I was just always the one asking questions. You could just rely on me for always having a question and a comment. I don't know. You can take it or leave it for what you want. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. But thank you for having me. It's great to
Yeah.
see you and to chat.
Yes, of course. I'm glad to have you and reconnect with you. And one of my fondest memories of CAP involves you, because we got to do the breakout session where we talked about deep quality connections. Do you remember that?
I do, very much so. Yeah, it
Okay.
was so fun.
So one of the things that I've shared on previous episodes is that like I hate small talk, right? So like I my thing has been go deeper faster when it comes to how I deal with relationships with people, because I think that it establishes rapport faster. It helps you kind of get to see like that authentic core faster, and then you walk away almost having like this interesting bond, even if it's been like for 20 minutes. So in the exercise, guys, we had to basically answer all of these questions about ourselves with whoever was the assigned person. But they were like very like personal questions, which allowed you to really just talk about your life. So Mary Kate got the opportunity to just learn more about me really quickly. I learned about you. And so I know though that quality connection is like something that walking away from CAP really became like your jam. So talk to me a little bit. Number one, I want to hear from you. Like, what was your experience between like our breakout session? Like, what did that leave you feeling like in terms of that moment in time between us?
Yeah, so I loved that. I loved that module about relationships because I'm all about connection, and I loved that activity. I think I think the whole idea of it was we had those questions to fall in love with someone. Because if you there was a
Yes.
series of, like, 30 plus questions, so if you ask all of
Mhm.
them and have that conversation, you're, like, falling in love with someone theoretically. I loved sharing that with you, though, because at the time, we were, like, obviously, like, friendly and, like, friends and of course, but I definitely got to know a deeper level of you, again, like,
Mhm.
super quickly, and I loved that you and I are both the type of person that, in that setting especially, doesn't hold back. Like, we're both pretty raw, pretty honest, like, we'll get to the point, like, there's not really sugarcoating it, so it
Yeah.
was so easy to vibe with you in that setting because we just got right to it, and at
Yeah.
the same time, so endearing because the questions were sweet.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely had that same experience. So, when we think about the value of connection, right? So, kind of in perspective now, 2020, 2021, really shifting everyone's life experience around their connection with other people because it was suddenly taken away. We
Mm,
saw as a unit and as a hive, like what it is to kind of go into this space of isolation and have to be very intentional around connection if we chose to, continue to have flourishing relationships, or if we felt like we needed to create spaces that maybe didn't exist before. And so I wanted to kind of go down this path with you of understanding from your perspective, what is the value of us being super intentional around building these quality connections with people?
yeah, that's a great question, and I really think it's everything. I mean, we learned from positive psychology that it can be summed up in 3 words: other people matter. So especially in the time of COVID where we're not able to maybe engage in all the activities that we once were, see all the people as easily as we did prior, um, it's super, super important to set aside energy and intentional time, to make those connections and to keep that relationship going, whether it's, um, a phone call, like every Thursday at 4 o'clock, you call your mother or father or sister. Those little things really do make a difference, and you'll probably notice too that you'll feel a burst of energy if it's a healthy relationship, if it's a good conversation, you'll probably feel a lot better coming off of that interaction. That's because healthy connections are life giving. We are social creatures. It's wired in our DNA. We need connection. We need healthy relationships in order to not only flourish but survive.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of, I mean, we learned that relationships are a driving factor of happiness and life satisfaction. I mean, what else do you need? It's so essential to our well-being.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because a lot of my listeners, or viewers now that we're on YouTube, hey y'all, um, are aspiring business owners or they run businesses.
Mhm.
And sometimes, and you may have even experienced this, so you can let me know, but when we're kind of in that building phase, it can sometimes feel very lonely. But it can also feel like we have to protect our baby being like our business. And so, meaning like, you don't want people to like shit on your dreams or tell you that you can or ask you why you can't do these things. And so, the model has sometimes been to kind of just like create this island where you're like doing your own thing, but we've also seen a lot of entrepreneurs um, really, really be affected negatively by this model because the whole, well, I don't want anybody to know what's going on, or I have to protect the space, or I have to be in this super hustle grind mode that I can't come out and play, ends up plaguing their mental health, it ends up ruining their relationships. So, do you have any advice specifically for people who maybe have been so focused on business that their level of connection and relationships has really just like taken a hit?
That's a really great point. I feel like I'm gonna be saying that a lot today, Alena. Um,
I love
yeah,
how you
I
think about your answers.
yeah, I mean, you have to. Um, the word balance is coming to mind. I mean, I'm very, very lucky that my husband is also an entrepreneur, and he experienced that loneliness when he was building up his business. I saw him do that. So
Mm,
I've learned from him in that way, and I also know that I can lean on him. Um, he understands what it's like to grow a business and the pains that go with that, if you will. So in that vein, I would say try and connect with other people who might know what you're experiencing, so you have someone who can really put themselves in your shoes and empathize with you. I would also say that intention is important there because you can also get really caught up in the comparison game when you're trying to grow a
mm,
business, right? So, judging others, judging yourself, comparing your business to that of others and things like that can really suck your energy and your joy. So if you're connecting with someone for the sake of really wanting to relate to them from a human level versus a professional level, I think that's an important distinction. Um, and also not being afraid to tell people who are not in this entrepreneurial space what you're doing. Um, depending on the circumstances, but actually, like, authentically sharing what you're doing, even if they might not understand it, you can try and explain it to them, and go for that, like, heart level, that deeper connection and see what comes of it. Because you I find in my work with my clients and in my personal life too, that if you actually go there and share that information, people generally respond really well and wanna know more about what you're doing.
mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. And I love the fact that you kind of brought up, your journey and kind of learning from your husband's journey. But I want to hear a little bit more about your journey. So I know that you come from more of like an academic background. And then I remember when we were in class one day, you're like, guys, I've decided to go the coaching route. And I remember being on the other end, like, yeah, do it, girl. So just tell us a little bit about your journey. And that can be all inclusive of kind of things that you experienced growing up that impacted decisions you made to kind of how you ultimately got to where you are. And I think that in that story, we're going to be able to really get an idea of these themes. But I'll keep my assumption to myself right now. But go ahead, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure, yeah, so, I'm trying to think of where to begin without, like,
Being here all day.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Okay, so I'll start from the present and work backwards. So I am a positive psychology coach and trainer. So I have a positive psychology based business called Tinana Teachings, which is founded on the idea of connection. I help people deepen their connections with themselves, with other people, and then by extension, the world around them. Um, I believe that connection is a pathway to flourishing, all of that good stuff. So my journey around this really began looking back when I was 5, I would say. Um, the start of my growing business, I'll say, is, I get flashback to this time of me and Cape Cod. I'm 5 years old at the ocean for the first time, and there's a picture of me in this power pose, my hands are on my hips, and I'm just beaming at the camera and wearing a bikini and 5 years old, not thinking about how I look, just being so full of energy, so vital, so happy in the moment, like, not self-conscious or aware of how I'm interacting with the world or how I'm looking. Um, and then the next year at 6, I started being called fat. And then for pretty consistently up until like my college years, I was called many derivatives of fat. Everything from like chubs in high school to the Duff designated ugly fat friend in college. It mostly came
Mm,
in the form of like light-hearted, playful jokes, but there was definitely something there. Um, and that really drew a wedge between me and my body. I grew up, as you could probably guess, with, terrible body image. So I grew up resisting, resenting, hating my body, not being connected to it at all, not understanding it, fighting it day in and day out. And it wasn't until I went to college and started taking health science classes, nutrition classes, working at a gym, that I began to learn and give thanks for this crazy system of cells and tissues and organs that support me and support everyone day in and day out. Um, so learning about nutrition and exercise and actually living that helped me kind of come back to myself, embody myself again. Um, and kind of flip the script and give thanks for my working legs and my beating heart, so I'm able to show up in the world the way I want to. At that same time, I took a course in positive psychology while I was abroad in New Zealand, and that just flipped my world right side up. So integrating the vitality stuff and the health stuff with positive psychology was just like, okay, this is my bread and butter. This is what I'm going to do. Um, Fast forward a few more years, I've come to the conclusion that connection begins with yourself. So
Mm,
now I'm on a mission to help other people um, find their way back home to themselves, right? Like reconnect with themselves wholly,
mm,
embrace and accept their bodies in a variety of ways, and kind of get to the root and the essence of who they are and how they can connect with themselves and others in the world. I don't think I took up
mm.
too much time with that, but that's a little
No,
slice
that
of
was
my
so
story.
good. That was so good. And guys, just in transparency, we were kind of thinking about the direction that we want to go because obviously we can talk positive psychology principles all day.
Mhm.
But we wanted to talk about connection. And initially I feel like I wanted to really lean into the power of creating this hive, right, and connecting with others. But the reality and that kind of pivot in this conversation, I think, has come just now because the reality is the connection that we have with others, for many of us, is being limited by the connection that we have with ourselves.
100%.
And I don't think that it even really like resonated with me when we were thinking like where we were going to go in terms of empowering the listeners, that would be a great starting place because it honestly is exactly kind of where I started my program too, which is, so I have what I've built out. Girl, I've just built out so many methodologies since we last talked. But in my simple method, which is what we teach in my life crafting program, the S is, it stands for story. And it's really about self discovery, but it's also going deeper than just yourself to kind of this DNA level that has been comprised based on the story of like your ancestors. And the goal is for you to really like have conversation with your family members, with your grandparents, with your peers to really get this true picture of who you are, maybe the stories that you've been telling yourself, the stories that you thought were true that aren't, so that as we move towards the coaching portion of it, that identity is like truly formed. Even if it's still evolving, it's truly formed. And so I don't even know why it didn't come to me at first in terms of where we would start a conversation. But I say all of that to say, let's talk about it. Like, let's talk about connecting with self. Um, I just recently interviewed, and no one has listened to this yet. So teaser or spoiler, or maybe you have listened to it because we're recording this in the future. But I had an interview with Dr. Jack, who was an intimacy coach, and this was the first time I've ever
Mm,
talked intimacy or sex on the podcast. And we talked about again so much of intimacy being about body image, and body confidence, and so you know, when you think about how much this is impacting all of us, right? Like, what do we say to ourselves? How do we feel about ourselves? What do you feel like is the first step in just like being very vulnerable with self? Like, how do we even start that internal work?
that's a really great question, but I want to just speak to something you said really
Sure.
quickly,
Okay.
just to highlight how pervasive body image struggles are. You
Mhm.
may know that I'm also fascinated by sexuality and sex, generally speaking. It's like
I
a
didn't know
different way.
that.
Oh, yeah. I
I knew
created a
Leah, but I didn't know. Like, I felt like you were like definitely feeling Leah vibes and like always asking her questions. But I didn't know that. I thought maybe you were just like tiptoeing in that, but I didn't know that was like a gem for you too. Interesting.
It is, not publicly, so I guess I'm changing
Okay.
that right now. I
Okay.
created a I created, a sexual and reproductive health program when I was in college, that
Okay.
was more of the medical side of things of, like, "Wear a condom, STIs, don't get
Yeah.
pregnant." But I've since explored, like, how sex is actually an expression of your personality because we have different
Mm,
tastes and likes and dislikes. Anyway, I bring that up because body image is so pervasive in the sense of how you show up in the world and how you relate to other people, and that includes how you show up in spaces that you wanna be perceived as attractive or unattractive, sexy or not sexy. My
mm,
struggle with my self-image growing up really, really held me back from pursuing relationships because I was
mm,
terrified to be in a situation where someone would have to see me in a somewhat sexual light because I was wearing baggy clothes, didn't want anyone to notice me, so I would purposely not even put on makeup or, like, make myself I guess, like, put any effort towards my appearance because my self-image was so low. Um,
mm,
and not that I'm a promiscuous person by any means, I never really have been, but I definitely held myself back in situations in college and whatnot, like going out to a party, having fun, flirting with people at a bar, all of that because I was so self-conscious. And looking back, like, robbed myself of some fun opportunities. I'm not saying, like, jumping into bed with everyone I met, of course, that's not what I'm saying at
mhm,
all, but just putting myself in a situation where I could spark some romance with someone, or
mm,
even build another relationship. Anyway, um,
wow.
so back to your question. Um, the first step to fostering that vulnerability within yourself, was that right?
Yeah, yeah, because I think that even to your point, people are having a moment right now, and even I'm reflecting on my choices. Um, Not even necessarily sexually, but just like active choices based on body image, right? Like
Yeah.
I always tell people when they ask me, "Are you going to homecoming?" And I'll be like, "It depends on if I lose weight." Like, wow. And I say that verbally, no shame, because there's just like a certain image that I have in my mind of how I looked in college. And that image has to, like I attach it. I just in this moment realized that like my associated body image with homecoming is looking real snatched and fabulous.
Yeah.
Wow. But we'll unveil more of that later. So my point is, as people are listening, they're probably like, okay, damn, like she really is calling me on my shit. So what do we do about that?
It's a damn good question, and I think the first thing to do is to give yourself grace because we live in a society and a culture that holds unrealistic beauty standards and that values a certain level of thinness or appearance that is just not what the average woman looks like. So,
Mm,
understanding that there are subliminal messages around us all the time telling us we should look and be a certain way, being able to call that out and see it for what it is, and then give yourself grace knowing other people put that there, like, that's not necessarily me, nor does it have
mhm,
to be for me, I think is a good first step in just realizing, like, how invisible and persistent and pervasive these messages are in our society. Um, Giving yourself grace in that way is, I think, important. Secondly, I would say, I mean, everyone take this as you will, but the body harbors pain, it harbors trauma, and so I understand that this might be incredibly painful for people to even, like, be in their body because of past experiences. So, oh, I think the one of the most powerful ways you can work with that is actually talking with other people about it. Um, Understanding that this is a really, really complex and messy topic, and I don't have all of the answers, and I certainly don't have all of the right answers. Um, so being patient and kind and gentle with yourself, I think, is really, really important. And if you're not there yet, then even maybe tolerating your body or tolerating yourself could be a good place to start. Um, and I also really, really, really believe that having the courage to share these things with other people is going to be the way that we call out the craziness in our society, make these invisible messages visible, and also break the shame that we hold for ourselves around these issues.
mhm. Ooh, yeah, that's
Right.
good. And it's like we all have to be accountable to that, right? I was just thinking about how I can remember growing up and there were just certain types of little girls, good, like, and this is not necessarily a good or bad thing, but like the way that, like, okay, I'll just give the example. So I remember being with a group of girls, and we had to be younger than 7 years old. And they were just like these beautiful, like chocolate girls. And I'm like a fairer complexion within my family. And I can remember my aunts like saying something about, their skin, being like, oh my gosh, like look at that beautiful brown skin. And that is something that is kind of an opposite experience of like a lot of people that dealt with colorism growing up, because people, often ignore darker complexions or say, oh, you're pretty for a dark skinned girl. But in my situation, I was the more fair of this particular group. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, like their skin is like so beautiful, brown and golden. My mother was darker. So even as a child, like I really wanted my skin to be darker, because like, that was like what they were like praising. But even now as an adult, as I reflect on it, it was also still such a powerful moment in like shifting the narrative within our culture, because they were basically doing what probably hadn't been done to them as darker complected women who basically probably were never looked at as like the standard of beauty. So in that moment, even though it kind of wasn't like the time for my own recognition, which is fine, when I think about it, my aunt was like doing something that we're seeing more now in media, which was she was making having an active interest in the conversation around Black beauty and brown beauty, and making sure that the brown girls in her circumference knew like your skin is beautiful, right? And here we are 30 years later, and makeup companies are now creating shades for them. And so I think that conversations like that to me are the things that have to happen now in terms of like early body image, right? Especially,
Mhm.
children are developing figures earlier and earlier. And it can sometimes over sexualize them too early. But instead, having conversations around, the powering curves or different body types. I watched a movie yesterday. Um, Dang, I can't remember the name of it, but it was with now I'm just drawing a whole blank. What's the lady's name from Bridesmaid? The comedian.
Kristen Wiig?
The brown hair, heavier set.
Oh, Melissa McCarthy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Melissa McCarthy. She's in this new movie on Netflix. But I was watching it and she's lost a ton of weight. But one of the things that I love about the way that they showcased her figure was like they didn't have her in like these kind of frumpy clothing. Like they kind of had her in like form, like figure clothing where you could like see like the pronunciation of like her butt and like her waist and like her big boobs. And I felt so empowered watching it, because she was like, her husband was slender. And there wasn't like, this was the first time that I felt like I saw her in a character where she was like wearing like fashionable clothes as a heavier, um, rounder woman. And I was like, she looks damn good. Like I just felt so good about there. And like this is other show on HBO with the lady, I can't pronounce her name, but she's from Orange is the New Black. She's a therapist, and she had like this fabulous wardrobe, and she was not a size 2. You know what I'm saying? Like she was like
Yeah.
the size 14, but again was like super on trend. And so it's like I feel like we're making, strides towards showing like these body positive images. And when we show them, the conversation is not about weight, right? It's just like, listen, I'm just a therapist, I'm just a mom, I'm just a wife, and I just happen to be this size, and I love my curves, but I'm not having to say it. It's just like, it's just like interpreted because of the way that I live my life. So, anyways, that was just an example of how I feel like in order for us to make an intentional effort around how we allow ourselves or give ourselves permission, and how we also contribute to society, is like starting to accept these things. It's like, this is just reality. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you bring up a couple of really good points, one of which is, and what you said, it just reinforces again how powerful the media is, right? Because
Mhm.
you relate to women who aren't a size 2 because women, generally speaking, aren't size 2. That's not the
Yeah.
average body type. So to have a woman wear nice clothes, show off her figure, but also exude this sort of comfortability and confidence in her own skin and that energy you put forth when you're actually feeling yourself in those clothes and in your curves without your thigh gap, whatever it is, right? People can
Mhm.
pick up on that. So there's a sense of comfortability and acceptance of being in your own skin and owning that, which I think is an important piece of it. Totally easier said than done, of course, but that's an important piece of it.
Mhm.
And the other thing too is that you mentioned this woman just being a counselor and a mom, right? And so they're highlighting that your appearance isn't necessarily the most important thing about you, right? Like as a
Mhm.
society, we
Mhm.
value,
Mhm.
especially women are really valued for how they look. Looking past that and understanding, no, I'm grateful for my legs because they help me walk and they help me chase my kids around and they help me show up the way I want to. Or
Mhm.
if I gain 20 pounds, I'm still going to be able to be just as good of a coach and a teacher and facilitator as I would be otherwise. Or my
Mhm.
husband's still going to love me no matter my shape or my size. Looking past the appearance piece and understanding that our values, our strengths, our talents don't have any relation to how we look is also a really important piece of that.
Mhm. Now, I'm gonna be honest, on a personal level, I kind of I struggle with these polarities between not overly judging myself or being critical of my appearance. Primarily, when I say appearance, I'm really talking about weight, and also this whole like, well, if you were focusing on nutrition and you were bringing in vitality, you wouldn't have these issues, right? So obviously, you kind of studying the body and honoring it and bringing in that vitality really helped you to become whole. But how do you kind of find that space between like the competing thoughts, right? Because I feel like they do compete. It's like, okay, girl, you say that you want to accept yourself, but does that mean that you use that as an excuse to not exercise? Because you're like, listen, I love myself how I am. Like, fuck that treadmill.
Or like you say, "Oh, I wanna feel better in my body," but really you're saying, "I wanna lose that fucking 10 pounds that's been hanging on since Christmas,"
Exactly.
right? Like,
Exactly.
it's funny you bring that up because I've actually been I still struggle with this to this day, and I've been playing around with these ideas of wanting to look good and feel good and holding
Hmm.
them in tandem. Um, I was reading an article the other day around how health is a sex symbol in our society and the relationship between healthiness and
Mm,
sexiness. For a lot of
so
like,
true.
yeah, right? It's so interesting. So, from an evolutionary biology standpoint, women are attracted to men with certain qualities, men are attracted to women with certain qualities, birth giving hips. Women like tall men with broad shoulders for a protective piece. But it goes deeper than that. There are certain pheromones that we give off that subconsciously make people seem more attractive than others, depending on how they smell, right? So like there's a
Hmm.
ton of nuance around it, but the idea of tying your health, which includes like maybe having those qualities, but also taking good care of yourself and having that energy, exuding that confidence, being comfortable in your skin, having that joy or spirit about you is also a part of it. It's what draws us to other people. Um, so I guess to answer your question, like I don't really have an answer because it's something I struggle
Right,
with too.
right,
But
right.
I think being aware of it is important, and I think asking yourself why you're having those thoughts or saying those things is also very important because you can kind of call yourself out on your own bullshit if you're like
Hmm.
if you're being self-complacent and you're like, "Oh, I love my curves. I'm not gonna exercise for the next week." Like, that's not necessarily a healthy choice because movement is good
Right.
for you. Um,
Yeah.
and at the same time, it's like, "Oh, I'm gonna skip a meal today because I'm going to a party this weekend." I'm sorry, my dog is barking.
Mhm.
Um, I'm gonna skip a meal because I'm going to a party this weekend and I wanna look good in my jeans. It's like, you're doing it because you wanna look a certain way, that's not
Yeah.
necessarily healthy either. So I think
Right.
kinda checking yourself, but it's a constant
Yeah. And I
journey.
think that, like you said, it's just it is being mindful enough to capture, right? So that's even a whole thing in itself. It's like there are some things that we don't even realize we have done for decades because we haven't slowed down enough to really kind of process our own thoughts, right? And so I definitely am like in this slower season. And when I say slower, like just the intentional, like what am I thinking, what am I feeling, how do I want to process this, like giving myself enough time in my day to have that is where I am. And so the fact that I'm even having moments in time where I can realize like, oh, I'm having a thought that doesn't necessarily serve me, but it's something that is deeply ingrained in me that I can choose to do something about it right now, or guess what? I could choose to do something about it when I feel like I'm in that season. Um, but even the awareness and the appreciation, I would say, even speaking to kind of how we both deal with it, I think that what I am starting to enjoy more than anything is the process of, like you said, calling myself on my own shit, right? Like that has become fun for me. It's become self serving in the sense of now that I'm a coach and I am teaching best practices, I always am like, even if you look at like ICF, right? It's like make sure that you're kind of modeling what you teach, right? Like as a coach, we want to model these things. And so I really am intentional about making sure that if I am telling my clients, hey, sleep is your superpower, like get more rest, that I am doing the same, and that if I'm not, I'm, recognizing whatever, right? So I just think that it's good to know that it's a journey, but that also there is joy like in the process, right? So it's
Yeah.
joy in being like, oh, I used to be a girl that, totally yo-yo dieted based on events. And guess what? That's part of my story. And I don't have to talk mess about her. But I can also say that, after 4 kids and 3 postpartum journeys, I know that I somewhere in me have discipline when I am ready, and I know what that feels like for me. And I can be confident in my body's ability to be healthy and disciplined when mentally I can get there, right? So
Mhm.
it's just interesting to kind of watch like these different elements that you deal with. Okay, so something else that came up that you said that made me think about myself was what was it? Oh, so you said that like the trauma. What did you say? I put it on the screen. The body harbors pain
Oh,
and trauma.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You said the body harbors pain and trauma, and kind of almost like doing the work to work those things out or be aware of them, like you said, give grace is a big thing. And so when you said it, what it made me think of was um so my do you have the pattern app? Okay. So the pattern app is basically like this app that's based on like your birth charts. Are you into astrology at all?
Um, I am intrigued by it. I don't know a ton about it, but I am an Aries through and through, I will say that.
Okay. When is your birthday?
April 2nd.
Oh, okay. You're early Aries. Okay, cool. Anyways, so my listeners know that I have been like into this app and I have like a fetish for astrology. It's my new positive psychology for 2021. Like I've just been studying a lot. I don't know much of anything. I'm a student of it right now. I'm just curious. So, anyways, on the pattern app though, or just like in astrology in general, they talk about how we don't have to kind of look at life as something that we have to kind of fight and fix, but instead we just kind of understand and accept that like this is, as it should be, and we live through it, right? And so the idea is like, based on like when you were born, what time you were born, this is where the moon was, this is where the sun was, this is where the planets were. and you kind of got bursted into this life based on, and I know I'm getting super astrology, and I'm, again, guys, no expert here, and I'm not trying to give y'all no type of witchcraft. I'm still a Christian. But anyways, I thought it was intriguing because they basically kind of said, hey, many of us have this life journey, and the purpose of the life journey is to kind of live it like an onion, where we're peeling back these layers to return to self, right? That's something that I feel like I've always kind of talked about, is like this journey home. But something that they talked about is like, there are some things that are just meant for your journey, for you to become the person that you are, right? So in that explanation, it would be more like, you were meant to be the fat kid so that you could, at the end of this journey, develop this thing, right? So for me, one of the things that they talked about was, the moment that I came on here, for in here, or even as a child, there was something that was going to make me feel like I wasn't enough. And when I read that, it like stuck me a little bit, because I feel like that is a voice that I have silenced for years, for my whole life. Because I don't know that I really felt that way, but I felt that way, but I knew I shouldn't feel that way. So when I heard this was like such a moment for me, because I was like, oh, wow. So I was always kind of meant to feel like I wasn't enough, which kind of explains my entire obsession with like personal development my entire life, which led me to become a personal development coach and all of these things. So it's interesting. But on your journey, sometimes there are things that happen that kind of secure this vision of yourself even more. So in the pattern, it said, oh, you may have grown up in a family that told you weren't enough, or nothing was ever enough. That wasn't true for me. So I'm doing all this work, And this, when you said the body harbors pain and trauma, it reminded me of this epiphany that I had, which was, what happened to me? Like, that's what I asked, like Oprah's book, what happened to you? What happened to me? And I realized that the one thing from my childhood that always made me feel lesser than was that I had chronic eczema. So similar to how children dealt with like obesity or acne, like I had, that was like my identity. I remember one time, and this was like kind of once my eczema had gotten better, because I had it bad as a kid. I was in high school, and we're at the mall, and this girl comes up to me and my friend, and she was like, oh, I remember y'all from summer camp when we were younger. She was like, yeah, you were the girl that had like the dark birthmarks behind your legs. And I was like, oh my God, like this girl remembers me from her childhood because of the dark eczema that I had behind my legs always. But she thought it was a birthmark. And it was like a moment in time where I realized, like, damn, just as much as I saw myself as like this girl that had this skin disease, like people saw me as that too. And so eventually I grew out of it, like in college. But I think that because I wasn't like this beautiful butterfly as a kid, because of like these scales and this dry skin and this constant itching, every part of me to become this like well liked, or this beautiful on the inside type of person, did all of this work that I don't even know that I realized was because of, I felt like my outer appearance just didn't match up. And my eczema has been gone for so long that I didn't realize this till like 2 weeks ago, that that was the harboring of pain and trauma that I held on to, in terms of always kind of overdoing it, because I felt like I had to make up for like what I didn't look like on the outside. Isn't that crazy?
Wow. Yeah. That's wow, that's so powerful. And your awareness around it is so cool to think back of like
And it just, when you said that, it made me think about just like, and I mean, it took me a while, because I mean, I struggled with this. I'm like, what is this app talking about? Like, why does it keep saying like you deal with a issue of not being enough because of X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, what could it have been? And then it hit me. So here we are, 30 years later, my body harbored, like my way of life has essentially been rooted to that one thing from my childhood, and I never knew it. And so in these last 3 weeks, girl, when I tell you that I have been in overdrive trying to heal and undo myself for things that are just at a subconscious level around my appearance. Um, so talk to me about, I know we talked about me, but I want to get back to you. in the same vein, though, when you think about all of those things, those name calling, the relationships that were like, oh, we're just joking, but secretly you're the fat friend, like all of that, how does that still lie beneath you? And how do you work through that healing process?
Yeah. Hmm. Um, I think I have mostly let it go. I would
Okay.
lie to you. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't still sting when I really think about it. And honestly, the chubs thing that I referenced earlier, I blocked that out of my memory. It was my best friend
Hmm.
recently brought that up about how I was talking about my business and body image. We were just telling stories and whatever. She was like, "Oh, no, like the soccer team used to call you Chubs. Like that was a nickname. They referred to you as that instead of using your name."
Mm-hmm.
And it just dawned on me like all of these memories and these things and these like pool parties and soccer games and just hanging out with friends at the lunch table, like everywhere.
Hmm.
People would call me Chubs. And it kind of I'm like kind of what I'm doing now. I'm sitting in it in awe of wow, kids are really cruel. Um, but I did block that out, and I was reminded of it recently. I'm I come from a perspective now, and again, like you referenced this earlier, of kind of having to practice what you preach.
Hmm.
So I feel like I've gotten to a point where I really give thanks for my body because I should say too that I'm fortunate enough that I am able-bodied. I don't have any underlying serious health conditions or chronic disease, so I'm able to move and be the way that I
Hmm.
want to, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Every day I'm grateful for my health. And that's just it. Like I've really done my best to flip the switch of
Hmm.
okay, yeah, I have a belly. Like, I've always had a little
Hmm.
belly, and I've grown to kinda like it, and I have stretch
Hmm.
marks on my belly, and actually, Alena, it's funny you talk about the eczema too because my there was a lot of loss and trauma that happened when I was in high school. We lost a student, I think, every single year I was in high school, and, my senior year, one of my good friends took his life. So, people were dealing with that in different ways, and I'm a really good emotional eater, so I started eating a lot, to deal with I was taking care of other people's feelings besides my own, so I was subconsciously dealing with my own grieving process through food. Um, so I gained weight and I got stretch marks on my stomach. Um, and at first, like, for years after, would not take off my shirt in front of anyone, like, not even my roommate, like, would put it like, just so, so embarrassed that I was 18, 19, 20 with stretch marks like I was pregnant. Now I call them my tiger stripes, and they remind me of the growth and strength that I went through as a teenager. Um,
Hmm.
so making meaning of the eczema, making meaning of the stretch marks, making meaning of the name calling, I think being able to actively flip that script to be more serving for you as you stand with me or, on the screen as a person stands here today, I think is one of the most powerful and difficult things you can do.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's so good. And again, it's like it starts with you, and then it ends up like you freeing yourself from that ends up being permission for other people to do the same, right? So I think that one of the things you mentioned in the beginning of the show was how you show up in environments can be based on kind of like your body image and how you connect with people also, right? So talk to me a little bit about someone really okay, let me take a step back. In your practice, typically what are people coming to you for?
Currently, um, I have clients actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I realized today that all of my clients, one way or another, have gotten into the issue of boundaries. So I'm having conversations about boundary setting, in relationships with all of my clients in different capacities. Um, I am a life coach through and through, so I would never turn anyone away if they wanted to work with me because all aspects of our lives are interconnected in some way. An ideal client would be, or in the context of what we're talking about now, I'm so passionate about this stuff. So anyone struggling with their body image or feeling a disconnect with their body or even the essence of who they are or wanting to dig deeper or finding that they feel like they have this untapped thing or potential within them, but they can't quite name it, they can't quite get at it. Like, please, that's like I love that stuff. Like making
Mhm.
meaning out of past events and hardship and trauma is like one of my favorite things too. And this is all centered around connection. By doing all of this work and peeling back those layers that you referenced earlier, you're getting to the essence of
Mhm.
who you are as a person and how you want to show up. And I think harnessing that authenticity and being able to express it wholeheartedly
Mhm.
is really hard, but also one of the greatest things we could do because it is a beautiful ripple effect. When you connect with yourself in that way, you're able to show up in your relationships in that authentic way, and then it ripples outward. Other people are seeing that within you. And whether you think it or not, you're actually giving people permission and sparking a sense of inspiration amongst others. So I believe if enough people do that, sooner or
Right.
later, we're all going to be showing up in the way that we want to in the world and expressing ourselves truly and
Yeah.
authentically.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we always hear, and the reason why I ask you that is because I was curious, like, what are kind of the threads? Because I realized that, again, like in a lot of my sessions, there are some common themes, but now based on our conversation, I realize that that is why I do encourage most of my clients to still go to therapy so that they can work through how things that they may be harboring are showing up in the actions that they're trying to take or the leader that they're trying to become. So, do you feel like there's anything that you do or any like intervention that you can think of that would help someone almost reverse engineer in the sense of if we react or act a certain way around a certain type of person or in a certain environment, how can we reverse engineer that to identify like, oh, this is a issue for me that I need to work on? Can you think of any instances like that?
So, like, tips on how to work with an emotion, a trigger around a certain type of person.
Yeah, so I'm thinking like, how do we help people who say when you say like you avoided certain environments, you avoided certain type of people, and this not necessarily just based on weight, but just in general, right? How we communicate with certain people. Like, I feel like there has to be a way that we can almost audit ourselves. Like, okay, why do I avoid that environment? Is it them or is it me?
Interesting. Yeah. Um, what's coming to mind right now is a brilliant concept called the line of consciousness by the Conscious Leadership Group. Are you familiar?
Okay. Mm-mm.
It's a 3-minute video, you can find it on YouTube. If you search location Conscious Leadership Group, it'll pop right up. This line of consciousness is basically a way to refer to how you're showing up in conversation. So when you're below the line of consciousness, you're coming from a place of scarcity, of fear, of control. You're more concerned with being right about a situation than actually learning the other person's perspective. It all relates to our negativity bias and our hardwiring of just looking for that thing to like grab onto and survive. Um, so that's when you're below the line. Um, coming from a place of like there's not enough money, there's not enough love, this total scarcity mindset. And then above the line of consciousness, you are open, you're curious, you're genuinely wanting to learn about the other person's perspective, maybe coming from a place of curiosity and play. Um, and so we know from positive psychology too that when you're in this more open headspace, if you're experiencing positive emotion, you're literally broadened, right? Like your periphery
Mhm.
opens up, you can see other opportunity. So I would encourage people to try and feel in their body or like even catch thoughts that are surfacing. Like immediately, if I see someone that drains me, I call them tapeworms. I can feel
Mm.
myself close off. I can feel my chest tighten. Like I'm trying to protect myself from this potential harm this person might inhibit on me because for some reason we don't jive. that is an indicator that, okay, I'm going below the line of consciousness. I'm coming from a place of fear, maybe control, of wanting to like control how they're going to act because I probably don't like how they're going to react. Um,
Mm,
it's just a reminder to me, like, okay, I'm closing up. I can feel this within myself. What can I do to maybe get to that neutral line of like just baseline, not necessarily shutting
mhm,
everything down that they're saying. Um, maybe how could I get to a place of openness? How could I try and see their perspective on something? How could I try and connect with them over like the smallest thing? Um, another thing that's coming to mind too is if you feel like if you feel this closingness within yourself, or if these thoughts are surfacing, like, oh my God, Jean, I can't, oh, not Jean again, like she's the worst.
mm,
Um, it's your brain and body trying to protect you, and there's a reason for that. So if you don't feel like it's safe to actually show your authentic self and to be vulnerable, that's okay. Not everyone deserves
mhm,
to hear your story and see the real you too. So that's something else to consider of like what do I need to do to best serve myself in the situation? If I want to show up trying to be more open, trying to see their perspective, let's play around with that. If I know there's
mhm,
actual danger and a threat here, let's just do what I need to do to protect my energy and move on. I'm not sure if that's
mm.
super helpful, but that's what
Yeah,
was coming
no,
to mind.
that's very helpful. That's in alignment with the global October energy. Again, Miss Astrology. I came across this random YouTube page this weekend, and he was talking about how the October energy, which I've seen this across 4 different sources this week, is about um, connectivity and collaboration and boundaries. And
Hmm,
the two kind of go hand in hand, but it kind of reminded me of what you just said, because when we think of boundaries, sometimes we're thinking about like, oh, what am I going to say? What script am I going to use to cut this person off? But he also was just saying how we have to kind of also create boundaries within ourselves based on what our energy is telling us. So he was saying, like, if you're interacting with a certain person, or if you go in a certain environment and you notice like your heart rate or your nervous system starts going all wonky, that is a cue or a trigger to you to think about, okay, this is a boundary. Like, I don't like when I'm in these situations, or I don't want, to interact with this person in this type of level, on this type of level. So I'm going to set the boundary to say, the way that I deal with them will either be pulled back, or it won't exist anymore, or I'm not going to do these things. So I thought that that was helpful in thinking about boundaries, kind of like you said, internally, where it's like, okay, if I notice this side of me starts to come out, or if I start trying to overcompensate for how I'm in it, like interacting with people, because I already know they're going to be like, whatever. And I find myself doing that too, especially when I'm connecting with people. If I know that the person is just like super type A, know it all, Aries. Listen,
hey,
all of my Aries friends, I always have to take a deep breath when I get on the phone with them. And my moon sign is Aries, which probably now makes sense again. It's all making sense, girl. You got to get into it. But my moon sign is basically like who you are at your core. Your sun sign is like how you present to others, right? So for me, I think it's because I secretly, my moon sign, I'm like an Aries, and I also think that I know everything. Presenting Aries who actually talk about everything sometimes like make me feel lesser than, because I'm like, man, they communicate how I feel so well, or they're communicating their point, but I have a better point, but I don't communicate as well as them. So now I just want to walk like, it's interesting. So, anyways, but I noticed that when I get around my know-it-all friends, sometimes I either completely shut down because I'm like, I don't want to, and this is my boundary that I've set, where I'm like, listen, I can think about one friend in particular, textbook Aries. And, she's the type of person that she wants to tell you everything about what's happening. And then as soon as you say, well, this may be happening, she'll be like, I don't know if that's the case. And I can't take that, I can't take
Mhm.
somebody just shutting down my opinion instantly as a coach. I'm always just like, well, at least breathe and think about what I said. So my own boundary is like, I just don't get anything. I just, say, yeah, that's great. And it probably is stifling our relationship, but intentionally I've realized that I'm only capable of going deeper with this particular friend in person. Like we just can't go there over text.
Ah,
And I realized like that's why I don't get in Facebook arguments because I can't type fast enough or with enough emojis to express how I really feel.
mhm.
And I'm big on people at least understanding my point, but I really want them to agree with my point. And most times that doesn't happen on Facebook. So that's a boundary that I set for myself because I noticed that like if I say something in a Facebook comment thread, I'm gonna check it all day long. I'm gonna make my point all day
Yeah.
long, and now my nervous system is a wreck. My dopamine is like at a all-time high. So I don't know how we got down this level of connection conversation,
All good.
but yeah. So talk to me a little bit about what you all actually. I know that you teach material, that you offer coaching, but I know that people are listening today and they're like, I want to keep the conversation going with Mary Kate. So, kind of, how can they learn from you? Like, what do you offer?
Yeah, so I am a coach and I'm always so open and willing for more coaching clients. So if anything that we're talking about today is intriguing to you, please feel free to um, contact me. I'm always happy to keep this conversation going. Um, I do have some workshops and things brewing, but I don't have any offerings yet. Um, but if you sign up for my newsletter on my website or follow me on social media, you will absolutely get those updates for when those things
Do
are
you still have
coming.
your Facebook community?
Oh, that's a good question. I have the group. I haven't been super active in it. I work full time at the Flourishing Center and am also trying to do this. So the Facebook group is on hold for now. But I do,
Okay.
I'm very active on Instagram and I do have a newsletter. The
Okay.
newsletter is where you're going to get the meat and potatoes of everything, though. So I would encourage you to sign up for that. And I will email you like twice a month max. It's nothing crazy. Um, yeah, coaching. I will have, like I said, I will have offerings. I'm using and marinating a lot of things right now, so things will be coming.
Well, you guys heard it here first. You all will be able to take advantage of this beautiful soul. I cannot say enough good things. And obviously, we have not even met in real life, which is hard to believe.
I know it's crazy.
But I've loved kind of watching you blossom and bloom into this entrepreneurial space, and I definitely keep up with your material because it's so thoughtful and you just have a ton of experience in the space. So I'm encouraging listeners and viewers to definitely make sure that you go follow Mary Kay, and I can't wait to see what you do at the Flourishing Center. Hopefully one day I can actually visit the Flourishing Center because it's been too long since I actually got to connect with you guys. But thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so fun, and as always, it's so good to see you.
You too. All right, guys, be sure to subscribe, hit that button, and we will see you on the other side.